But it didn't take the candle maker to invent the light bulb. It's a bit of a cliche, but it's a powerful one. It took somebody else, it took Edison and other people, in fact, before Edison, and lots of trials and lots of failings, as Anshu's referred to invent the light bulb. A disruptive innovation, I'll come back to that, but it wasn't the candle makers, wonderful though the candle makers were. It took something else that made a difference that, of course, changed our world in the most profound of ways. But it's all to do with, well, a little bit of process, something that's new, something that's improved, and I'll come on to the second bit in a moment. But the reason I mention that, and the top there, the Humanitarian Innovation Fund, is a fund that's been around 8-9 years. Some of you might be knowing it. I happen to have been involved in that since it started in 2010. And my point of saying this is we meet every 6 months on a grants panel. Every time we have the conversation of we don't really know what innovation is, because it's a kind of felt thing. I mean, we can look at the definition that HIF uses. Well, new or improved product, absolutely everything is an innovation. Everything. My shirt, surprisingly enough, for other things, everything is an improvement on what it was. I can't think of anything that wasn't. So in that sense, everything's an innovation. And I don't say that to then cripple us and mean we can't do anything, but actually to embrace this idea of learning. And it doesn't need to be a rarefied phrase. We can be a bit scared. Anyway, there's an awful lot of theory and research around. There's lots. But you know what? This undertaken by a few other people. They did a review of what innovation is. That it wasn't really talked about in the humanitarian space, response to disasters and conflicts, until only 10 years ago. Of course, we knew what it meant, but it wasn't really used. And since then, it's been used a lot, and not least, of course, with DEP and the labs and all the things and others are doing. But I want to get on to this point. The WISE innovation been very powerful in the last 10 years, and it really has. You don't meet an organization that doesn't talk about innovation. Well, that research that others did is because we failed to learn. And we have endless evaluations in the aid world and in development and humanitarian. And they're very good. I'm not saying they're bad in any way. But we failed to learn. That was the learning. For those who have been in evaluations, done them, you say the same thing. You can write an evaluation of your project before you've even gone there, before the project started. Because they're systemic, it's partnership, it's funding, it's scaling up. Absolute. And lots of people are nodding. Join me in my therapy. Well, the idea of innovation came in... No. Came in as the idea that we're not taking on board the lessons of learning. Look at Al Knapp's work on that, actually. So that's really, I found that very interesting. So a couple of thoughts, and Anshu's touched on this, and Nabs, you touched on this a lot, actually, and everyone else. An innovation process, which sounds counterintuitive. What? I'm just going to be brilliant, and it's going to be okay. Well, of course it's not. It's the scaling up, the diffusion, these amazing things. And you told the story, of course. It was your colleague going the second time and noticing it. Okay, so the recognition. There's a problem, the innovation, the scaling up. The HIF and others too talk about 5 different activities. They say one after the other, and that also sounds counterintuitive to me, maybe to you too. But I just want to make the point, it's quite a complex process, and there are endless examples of things we've never heard of that were brilliant, which failed because they didn't get diffused, they didn't scale up. Had your colleague not seen that, we wouldn't be talking about it now. All these innovation things are actually based on quite a complex set of procedures, which we all know, and that's been something that DEP has been grappling with, and it's really hard, right? It's really hard. So innovation is hard when it really works. Sorry about this. There are 4 kinds that people say. This professor of innovation, actually, John Besant, and 4 others, they talk about 4 things. One is a product innovation. Maybe that's the most obvious thing, the better something. That's an innovation, right? The way you experimented and designed those junctions. That's a product thing, a process. I tell you now, as part of the HIF grant panel, it's really hard to fund processes. Really hard. And we want to fund things around better shelter, processes, distributions, connections, the rest. It's a really hard thing to nail down. Innovation in process, we at least have found hard. But innovations in positions, the way things are positioned. The example people often say is, in fact, Levi jeans, which, were worker jeans of the American Midwest of very poor people until they were rebranded, 40, 30 years ago, something like that, into being, at that time, at least the 1980s, the coolest jeans on the planet. That's the repackaging, a position innovation in the marketplace, which we forget about. And then this other one, the paradigm innovation. And, it wasn't that long ago that we used phones for phoning people. But obviously now I watch Netflix, so you probably do the same thing. We use this for a million things. So that's a paradigm innovation, a fundamental shift in itself, which is very powerful. All right, just a couple of other ones. Disruptive and incremental innovations. So I mentioned the candle holder and the candle one. Henry Ford, you probably know this image as well, who invented the mass-produced vehicle, not the inventor of the combustion engine, but the mass-produced vehicle. He said that if he'd have asked people what they'd have wanted, they would have wanted a faster horse. It's kind of interesting, and I'm sure that's true, a faster horse. But the idea of someone coming in and mass production, and of course that was all about being efficient, not inventing the vehicle, but actually being efficient, because the internal combustion engine is about the most stupid thing you've ever seen, right? A series of small explosions captured. It's crazy. And batteries were being invented at the same time, and then petrol came in, but then it's another story, another day. That one I said, this one you might quite like, Rachel. Then in your back garden, in your house in St. Margaret's Road in Oxford, for many years you had two different kinds of seat. And you probably can't see this very well close up, but this was after some rain, and I was staying with Nabil and Rachel. And this was after some rain, and this seat had a little puddle of water on it, okay? And this one obviously didn't because it's got the slats. As a chair, that's now completely useless. This is what it was designed to do had no value whatsoever. But this innovation of putting slots in made all the difference. This is just an invite. Please look at HIF. Actually, the HIF actually give grants for innovation in humanitarian space. So like Rohingya and Cox's Bazar and elsewhere. I won't talk much about it because you can find it. But the HIF's funded hundreds of programs around the world in the last 8-9 years. There's a funding round coming up. And take a look. And it's specifically open to anybody. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but just to say there are lots of things that don't work because they're over technology busy. They think they can solve it with things that are crazy, but I'm not going to talk about that because it's too long a story. But I just want to summarize by saying we do have to use innovation. We have to be clever with innovation, and Seeds does it brilliantly, and others do it brilliantly, and all those things. But we can't afford not to do it, and it could be the small stuff that really matters in innovation. So I think I'll stop there. Great. Thanks. Thank you.